Wounds Made by Gunshot, Fiery Engines, and All Sorts of Weapons. The 11th book, by Ambrose Parey. A German of obscure birth and condition kept a powder in a bowl. We don't know why he kept this gunpowder in a bowl. The powder suddenly caught fire and cast a tile covering it high above. I think we should never mention the name of the man who invented guns. His name was Constantine Analzin. Man alone of all creatures is not always killed by being touched with thunder. There are many remedies against thunder. For example, the charms that the ancient Romans used to drive thunder away. And because they never penetrate deeper into the ground than 5 feet, the fearful can escape to the caves. Of those things which grow out of the earth, thunder nor lightning touches the bay tree. Always wore a laurel wreath around his neck when the air was troubled. Tents of seal skin, because it touches not this kind of creature, as neither the eagle amongst birds. But on the contrary, charms, the victorious bay, the seal, the eagle, nor any such thing profits against the violence of these fiery engines. No, not even a wall 10 feet thick will save you. Cannons are so much more violent than thunder, as is evident by that thunder can be dispersed and driven away with the ringing of bells, the playing of trumpets, the tinkling of brass kettles. But the fury of cannons, once provoked, is stayed by no opposition. He cauterizes the wounds made by gunshot, because he thought them poisonous, teaching that the same wounds are of themselves void of all poison, and therefore that all their malignity depends upon the faults of the air, and ill humors predominate in the bodies of the patients. I was a surgeon in the king's army. In this conflict, there were many wounded on both sides with all sorts of weapons, but chiefly with bullets. I was not very experienced at that time in surgery. Neither was I accustomed to dressing wounds made by gunshot. I had read in John de Vigo that wounds made by gunshot were poisoned due to the gunpowder. The cure was to burn or cauterize them with oil of elders, scalding hot, with a little treacle or molasses. But for that I gave no great credit to the author nor the remedy, because I knew that caustics could not be powdered into wounds without excessive pain. I first checked to see if the other army surgeons used any other method of dressing these wounds. I observed and saw that all of them used the method of dressing which Vigo prescribes, and that they filled as full as they could the wounds made by gunshot with tents and pledgets dipped in the scalding oil at the first dressings, which encouraged me to do the same to my patients. One day I ran out of the oil. Now, because there were still a few patients left to be dressed, I was forced to apply something other than oil and dress their wounds as such so it wasn't obvious to them that I was out of supplies. I made a digestive, which is a mixture or ointment, from the yolk of an egg, oil of roses, and turpentine. I could not sleep all that night. I was troubled that the dressing was unfit, and I feared that the next day I would find them dead. Therefore, I rose early in the morning to visit those patients, and beyond expectation, I found that the ones who were treated with only the digestive were free from vehemence of pain, to have had good rest, and that their wounds were not inflamed, nor tumefied. But on the contrary, the others that were burnt with the scalding oil were feverish, tormented with much pain, and the parts about their wounds were swollen. I tried it in many others, and I often thought that neither I nor any other should ever cauterize any gunshot wound ever again. When we first came to Turin, there was there a surgeon far more famous than all the rest in skillfully curing gunshot wounds. I diligently labored for 2 years to gain his favor and love, hoping he would teach me what kind of medicine it was, which he called balsam. That was the reason of his success with gunshot wounds. So I went to my surgeon, and I told him that I could take no pleasure in living there, since the favor and Mercedes, his literary patron, of my studies is gone. I told him I will return to Paris, and that I would neither hinder nor discredit him to teach his remedy to me when I'm so far away from him. When he heard this, he made no delay, but asked me to provide 2 whelps, puppies, 1 pound of earthworms, 2 pounds of oil of lilies, 6 ounces of Venice turpentine, and 1 ounce of aquavita, alcohol. In my presence, he boiled the puppies alive in the oil until the flesh came off the bones. Then he put in the worms, which he had first killed in white wine, that they might so be cleansed from the earthy dregs in which they live. And then he boiled them with the puppies until they became dry, and had spent all their juices therein. Then he strained it through a towel without much pressing, added the turpentine, and lastly the aquavita. Calling God to witness, he said this was the recipe for his balsam that cured the gunshot wounds by bringing them to suppuration. Thus he sent me away as rewarded with a most precious gift, requesting me to keep it as a great secret and not to reveal to anyone. I saw many soldiers drink a great quantity of gunpowder with wine, because they were persuaded that it would cure their wounds. Many scattered this gunpowder upon rebellious ulcers, without any harm coming to them. One of the Marshal of Montagnan's kitchen boys accidentally fell into a cauldron of oil that was almost boiling hot. When I was called to treat him, I went to the apothecary to fetch refrigerating medicines commonly used in this case. There was present, by chance, a certain old countrywoman, who, hearing that I desired medicines for a burn, persuaded me to lie a raw onion beaten with a little salt on the dressing, so I should hinder the breaking out of blisters or pustules, as she had found by frequent experience. Yeah, I feel sorry for this cook who has frequent experience with falling into boiling cauldrons of oil. I decided to test her medicine upon this greasy scullion. The next day I found those places of his body where the onions lay to be free from blisters, but the other parts which had not been touched by onions were all blistered. A while later, a German of Montagnan, his guard, had his flask full of gunpowder catch fire, whereby his hands and face were grievously burnt. I was called and laid the onions beaten, as I have told you, to the middle of his face, and to the rest I laid medicines usually applied to burns. At the second dressing, I observed the part dressed with the onions quite free from blisters and excoriation, flayed skin, whereas the other part was troubled with growth. Therefore, I gave credit to the medicine. In addition, I have observed that the best way to extract bullets shot into the body is by setting the patients in the same posture, at the same location as he was when he received his injury. I published the first book in 1545, which was very well received. It's due to the foulness of the patient's body and the unseasonableness of the air. For proof, I will tell you what I observed in a Scottish nobleman, the Earl of Gordon, Lord of Ashidon. He was shot through both his thighs with a pistol, the bone being not hurt nor touched. The 32nd day after the wound, he was perfectly healed, so that he had neither fever nor any other symptom which came upon the wound. If you doubt, there are worthy witnesses, all of whom wondered how this gentleman was healed so quickly without an acrid medicine applied. 30 years ago, I had found the way to cure wounds made by gunshot without scalding oil or any other more acrid medicine. King Charles IX, returning from the expedition and taking of Rouen, inquired of me concerning the wounds made by gunshot. The Prince of the Rock and many other noblemen asked me why men die from gunshot wounds that don't look very serious, and were treated by expert surgeons, if it's not due to poison. The malignity which we frequently meet with in curing wounds made by gunshot is not due to either poison carried into the body by the gunpowder or the bullet, nor to the burning by the gunpowder. We must dispel the opinion that wounds made by gunshot have poison, and we must teach that there is neither any poisonous substance nor quality in gunpowder that could poison the bodies of such as are wounded. The ingredients of gunpowder are only 3: charcoals of sallow, willow, or hemp stalks, brimstone, and saltpeter, and sometimes a little aquavita. You shall find each of these void of all poison. Now as to the brimstone, which is the most suspicious ingredient, Dioscorides, a Greek physician from 40 to 90 AD, prescribes a drink of brimstone supped out of a raw egg to cure asthma, coughs, and yellow jaundice. Now that we have put to rest the false idea that bullets are poisoned, let us now overthrow the idea that gunshot wounds are poisoned due to combustion. First, it can scarce be understood how bullets, which are commonly made of lead, can attain to such heat that they must be melted. Furthermore, a bullet shot into a barrel of gunpowder should set it all on fire if the bullet was hot by being shot. Take a bullet of wax and keep it from the fire, for otherwise it would melt, and shoot it against an inch board, and it will go through it. Whereby you may understand that bullet cannot become so hot by shooting, nor burn like a cautery, but the orifices, some may say, of such wounds are always black. This indeed is true, but it is not from the effect of heat brought thither by the bullet, but the force of the blow. The blow is exceedingly great, both because the bullet is round and enters the body with incredible violence. An esker is a scab. They say that discharging a piece of ordnance is absolutely like thunder and lightning. I am not ignorant that lightning, generated from a large and vicious exhalation, breaks the cloud in which it's encompassed, doesn't so much as fall upon the earth, but brings fire with it. That there are 3 several kinds of lightning, differing in burning, condition, and amount. One of them penetrates objects it touches. The other dissipates the objects, because it has a more dense and forcible nature, like whirlwinds have. The third burns what it touches, leaving behind the impression of the burning. Also, I know that lightning is of a pestilent and stinking nature, occasioned by the large matter that it's made of, which matter, taking fire, sends forth so loathsome and odious a smell that wild beasts cannot endure it, but so leave their dens, if they chance to be touched with such a lightning. Besides also, we have read in the history of Olaus Magnus, that in some places after a lightning, you shall find a whole plain spread over with brimstone, but it's extinguished, unprofitable, and of no efficacy. But despite this, we must not therefore conclude that the bullets of the great ordnance carry poison and fire with them into the wounds. For though there are many similarities between lightning and discharging guns, they have no similarities in matter or substance, but only in effects, whereby they shake, break asunder, and disperse the bodies which withstand them. Lightning and thunder do it by means of fire, and oft times of a stone generated in them, which is termed a thunderbolt. But shooting a bullet, it's carried by the force of the air, more violently driving and forcing it forwards. These are powerful arguments that shooting guns and lightning are not the same thing, but to admit that would force me to also say that gunshot wounds are due to combustion. According to Pliny, a Roman author in AD 23 to 79, there are some lightnings which consist of a dry matter that shatter all that withstands them, but do not burn at all. Others, which are of somewhat a more humid nature, burn no more than the former, but only black such things as they touch. Lastly, others some of a more subtle and tenuous matter, whose nature, as Seneca said, we must not doubt to be divine, if but for this reason, that they will melt gold and silver without harming the purse that holds it, a sword without hurting its scabbard, the head of a lance without burning the wood, and shed wine without breaking its vessel. According to which decree I can grant that these lightnings which break asunder, melt and dissipate, and perform other effects so full of admiration, are like in substance to the shot of great ordnance, but not these which carry with them fire and flame. In proof of this, there comes to mind the history of a certain soldier, out of whose thigh I extracted a bullet wrapped in the cloth of his breeches, which had no sign of tearing or burning. I have seen many who weren't wounded, nor so much as touched, but nevertheless have fallen down as if dead, due to the report and wind of a cannon bullet sliding close by their ears, so that their members become livid and black. They eventually died of gangrene. These are like the effects of lightning which we mentioned, and yet they bear no sign nor mark of poison. From whence I dare now boldly conclude that wounds made by gunshot are neither poisoned nor burnt, universal and deadly to so many worthy personages and valiant men. What then may have been the cause thereof, if not combustion nor poison? This must we therefore now insist upon and somewhat heartily explain. Those who have spent all their time learning and searching out the mysteries of natural philosophy would have all men think and believe that the 4 elements have much mutual sympathy. 4 elements are the 4 humors. That they may be changed changed each into other, so that they not only undergo the alterations of the first qualities, which are heat, coldness, dryness, and moisture, but also the mutation of their proper substances by rarefaction and condensation. Fire is frequently changed into air, the air into water, the water into air, the air into fire, because these four first bodies have in their common matter enjoyed the contrary in fighting, yet first and principal qualities of all. We have an example in the ball bellows brought out of Germany, which are made of brass, hollow and round, and have a very small hole in them, where the water is put in, and so put to the fire. The water is rarefied into air, and so they send forth wind with a great noise, and blow strongly as soon as they grow thoroughly hot. You may try the same with chestnuts, which, cast whole and undivided into the fire, presently fly asunder with a great crack, because the watery and innate humidity was turned into wind by the force of the fire, and forcibly broke his passage forth. The air or wind raised from the water by rarefaction requires a larger place, so it can't now be contained in the narrow skin of the chestnut, wherein it was formerly kept. Just after the same manner, gunpowder being fired turns into a far greater proportion of air, according to the truth of that philosophical proposition, which says of one part of earth there are made 10 of water, of one of water 10 of air, and of one of air are made 10 of fire. Now this fire, not possible to be spent in the narrow space of the piece, where the powder was formerly contained, endeavors to force its passage with violence, and so casts forth the bullet lying in the way, yet so that it presently vanishes into air, and does not accompany the bullet to the mark or object which it batters, spoils, and breaks asunder. Yet the bullet may drive the obvious air with such violence that men are often sooner touched by that than by the bullet, and die by having their bones shattered and broken with any hurt on the flesh which covers them, which, as we have formerly noted, it was common with lightning. We find the like in mines. When the powder is once fired, it removes and shakes even mountains of earth. In 1562, a small quantity of gunpowder caught on fire by accident in the arsenal of Paris, and caused such a tempest that the whole city shook, and it overturned many of the neighboring houses, shook the tiles off the roofs, and broke the windows of the houses farther away. Like a storm of lightning, it laid many here and there for dead. Some lost their sight, others their hearing, and others had their limbs torn asunder as if they had been rent with wild horses. And all this was done only by agitation of the air, which the gunpowder turned, just as winds pent up in a hollow place of the earth which lack vents. In seeking passage forth, they vehemently shake the sides of the earth, and raging with a great noise about the cavities, they make all the surfaces tremble, so that by the various agitation, one while up, another down, it overturns or carries it to another place. Megara and Aegina, ancient and famous cities of Greece, were swallowed up and overturned by an earthquake. Amongst things necessary for life, there is none that causes greater changes in us than the air, which is continually drawn into the bowels appointed by nature, and whether we sleep, wake, or whatever else we do, we continually draw it in and breathe it out, through which occasion Hippocrates calls it divine, for that breathing, through this mundane orb, it embraces, nourishes, defends, and keeps peace all things contained in it, friendly, conspiring with the stars, from whom a divine virtue is infused within. The air, diversely changed and affected by the stars, does in like manner produce various changes in the lower mundane bodies, and hence it is that philosophers and physicians do so seriously with us to behold and consider the culture and habit of places and constitution of the air when they treat disease. The great power and dominion of the air is very apparent, as you may gather by the 4 seasons of the year. For in summer, the air being hot and dry, heats and dries out our bodies. But in winter, it produces in us the effects of winter's qualities, that is, of cold and moisture. Yet by such order and providence of nature, that although according to the varieties of seasons, our bodies may be variously altered, yet shall they receive no detriment thereby, if so be that the season retains their seasonableness, from whence, if they happen to digress, they raise and stir up great perturbations, both in our bodies and minds, whose malice we can scarce shun, because they encompass us on every hand, and by the law of nature enter together with the air into the secret cabinets of our bodies, both by occult and manifest passages. For who is he that does not by experience find both for the commodity and discommodity of his health the various effects of winds, what the air is mixed with, according as they blow from this or that region or quarter of the world? Wherefore, seeing that the south wind is hot and moist, the north wind cold and dry, the east wind clear and fresh, the west wind cloudy, it is no doubt but that the air which we draw in by inspiration carries together into the bowels the qualities of that wind which is then prevalent. When we read in Hippocrates that changes of time, whether they happen by different winds, chiefly bring diseases, for northerly winds do condense and strengthen our bodies and makes them active, well-colored, and daring, by resuscitating and invigorating the native heat. But southern winds resolve and moisten our bodies, make us heavy-headed, dull the hearing, cause giddiness, and make the eyes and body less agile, as the inhabitants of Narbonne, a seaside town in southern France, find to their great harm, who are otherwise ranked among the most active people of France. But if we would make a comparison of the seasons and constitutions of a year by Hippocrates' decree, droughts are more wholesome and less deadly than rains. I judge for that too much humidity is the mother of putrefaction, as you learn by these countries which are blown upon by a wind from the sea. For in these flesh which is kept for food, therefore as when the seasons of the year successively fall out agreeable to their nature, and when each season is seasonable, then either we are not sick at all, or assuredly with less danger. So on the contrary, the perfect constitution and health of our bodies becomes worse and decays when the seasons of the year are depraved and perverted in time and temper. Now, seeing that these many years, the 4 seasons of the year, have lacked their seasonableness, the summer lacking his usual heat, and the winter its cold, and all things by moisture and the dominion of the southern winds have been humid and languid, I think there is none so ignorant in natural philosophy and astrology who will not think that the causes of the malignity and contumacy of those diseases which have so long afflicted all France are not to be attributed to the air and heavens. For otherwise, why else have so many pestilent and contagious diseases tyrannized so many people of every age, sex, and condition? Why else do so many have catarrhs, coughs, and heaviness of the head, so many pleurisy, tumors, smallpoxes, measles, and itches, not admitting of digestion, and remedies prescribed by art? Why else do we have so many venomous creatures like toads, grasshoppers, caterpillars, spiders, wasps, hornets, beetles, snails, vipers, snakes, lizards, scorpions, and efts or newts, unless from excessive putrefaction which the humidity of the air, our native heat being liquid and dull, has caused in us, and the whole kingdom of France. Hence also proceeds the infirmity of our native heat, and the corruption of the blood and humor of which we consist, which the rainy south wind has caused with its sultry heat. Why else in these last years I have drawn little blood, which hasn't presently shown the corruption of its substance by the black or greenish color, as I have diligently observed in all such as I have bled, by the direction of physicians, either for prevention of future or cure of present diseases. The fleshy substance of our bodies could not but be faulty both in temper and consistency, seeing that the blood from which it is generated had drawn the seeds of corruption from the defiled air. Because of this, the wounds which happened with loss of substance could be scarcely healed or united because of the deprived nature of the blood. The wounds and ulcers of those who are troubled with the dropsy, whose blood is more cold or wholly watery, so of leprous persons, whose blood is corrupt, and lastly of all such as have their bodies full with ill juice, will not easily be cured. Yes, Assuredly, if but the very part which is hurt swerve from its native temper, the wound will not easily be cured. Therefore, seeing all these things, both the putrefaction of the air and depraved humors of the body, and also the distemper of the affected parts conspired together to the destruction of the wounded, what marvel was it, if in these late civil wars, the wounds which were for their quantity small, for the condition of the wounded parts but little, have caused so many grievous accidents, and lastly death itself, especially seeing that the air which encompasses us is tainted with putrefaction, and corrupts and defiles the wounds by inspiration and expiration, the body and humors being already disposed or inclined to rot. Once there came such a stink, a sure sign of rot, from these wounds that even when they were dressed, anyone standing nearby could hardly endure it. Noblemen as well as common soldiers would suffer from this rotten smell. The corruption was so bad that if they went undressed for one day, which sometimes happens amongst such a multitude of wounded persons, the next day the wound would be full of worms. In addition, and this shows it was due to rotten humors, many had abscesses in parts opposite to their wounds. For example, an abscess in the left knee when as the right shoulder was wounded, or an abscess in the left arm when the right leg was hurt. This was the case for the King of Navarre, the Duke of Nevers, the Lord Rendon, and many others. For all men had such an abundance of vicious humors that if it wasn't expelled through the abscesses, it traveled to other parts of the body. In dissected dead bodies, we observed that the spleen, liver, lungs, and other organs in the abdomen were full of pus. The patients continually suffered from fevers because of this moisture being sent from the organs to the heart. They suffered because the liver and veins were so polluted with pus that good blood couldn't be generated, so they lacked proper nourishment. And when the brain was affected by these excess fluids, the patients were molested with ravings and convulsions. And that is why if anything happened unprosperously in such great malignancy of wounds, the surgeon was not to be blamed, because it was a crime to fight against God and the air, wherein the hidden scourges of the divine justice lie hidden. When we follow the commands of the great Hippocrates, who says to bring all bruised wounds to suppuration in order to heal them, and we have not only obliged with suppuration, but adding other medicines as well. And yes, gunshot wounds are bruised wounds, but we still fail to cure them because of these rots, gangrenes, and dead flesh that came about from the corrupt air, because we had to treat not only the bruise, but also the cut, as wounds made from a sword. At some point, there's just nothing more we can do but remove ourselves. Chapter 1. Variety to gunshot wounds. All wounds made in man's body by gunshot, whether simple or compound, are accompanied with bruising, tearing, illness, and swelling. I say all these happen in either the noble parts or ignoble, the fleshy, nervous, or bony, and sometimes tearing asunder the larger vessels, but sometimes without harming them. These wounds are either superficial or else pierce deep and pass quite through the body. But there is another factor to consider: the variety of the bullets themselves. Some bullets are bigger, some smaller, and some in between. They're usually made of lead, yet sometimes they're made of steel, iron, brass, or tin. Rarely, they're made of silver, and even more rare are the bullets made of gold. There arises no difference from their shape, for almost all of them are round. But from the differences, the surgeon must make his diagnosis about what to do and what medicines to apply. The first care must be that he does not mistake these horrid symptoms to arise from combustion or poison, as we have already gone over. Rather, he should judge they proceed from the vehemence of the contusion, tearing, and fracture caused by the bullet's violent entry into the nervous and bony bodies. For when the bullet only strikes upon the fleshy parts, the wound will be cured as easily as any other wound that occurred from bruising and from a bruising round weapon. I have found this from frequent experience as I followed wars and performed surgery to many noblemen and common soldiers. Chapter 2. Signs of wounds made by gunshot. Wounds made by gunshot are known by their shape, which is usually round, by their color, After the original color decays, it leaves behind a livid greenish or other color. By the feeling or sense of the stroke, when in the very instance of the receiving thereof, he feels a heavy sense as if some great stone or piece of timber or some other such weighty thing had fallen upon him. By the small quantity of blood which issues out of it, when the parts are bruised, a little while after the impact they swell up so much that they can scarce admit a tent. By heat, which happens either by the violence of the motion or the vehement impulsion of the air. You may also guess that the wound is made by gunshot if the bones are broken and the bone splinters are pricking the neighboring bodies, causing inflammation. But the reason the bullet makes such a big bruise is that it enters the body not with any points or corners, but with its round and spherical body, which cannot penetrate but with mighty force. Hence also proceed many grievous symptoms such as pain, inflammation, abscess, convulsion, frenzy, palsy, gangrene, and dying flesh, until at last death ensues. The wounds often cast forth virulent and very much stinking filth due to the great bruising and the tearing of the neighboring particles. A great abundance of humors flow. Verily neither a stag with his horn, nor a flint out of a sling, can give so great a blow, or make so large a wound, as a leaden or iron bullet shot out of a gun, as that which going with mighty violence pierces the body like a thunderbolt. And that is where we will end. I hope you sleep well. Good night.